Give us just a minute to wait for the red light.
Oh, there it goes. Something works.
Centerville City Council is now in session. Thank you for your patience with us as we concluded a RDA meeting and a budget work session. We're a little bit slow cleaning that up and having some technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience. We're glad to have so many of you with us tonight. We'll note that all members of the City Council are here and accounted for. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and seeing no scouts in the audience, I will lead that. And then Jacob Smith from our staff will provide a prayer or a thought. So if you'd join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dear Father in heaven, we're grateful to Thee this day that we can meet together as a community, as residents, citizens, and friends to discuss issues that involve all of us, that help to promote our quality of life. We're grateful for this land of freedom that we have and for those that protect our freedoms and our liberty. Help us now to be guided by Thy hand. Help us to have Thy Spirit to quicken our minds and help us to understand and be able to come to the decisions that would be best for all of those that live here in Centerville. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jake, for that. We hope a number of you are here for some of the public hearings and items on our agenda. But we will start with an open session, which is an opportunity for any resident or a member of the public to come and speak to us on any matter of municipal concern. So if you're here for a specific item that's where we have a public hearing, we invite you to speak then during the budget public hearing or looks like we have a subdivision public hearing. But if you've got something else you'd like the council to be aware of during our open session, we'd invite you to come to either microphone and speak to the council. So the open session is now open.
Good evening. My name is Ann Casper. I am the daughter of Phil and Jeanette Sessions. And Robin had asked my dad to come and speak, but his hearing aids are not functioning. And so being his only child, I got the distinct opportunity to do this tonight. So just in starting, I'm a lifelong resident of Centerville, and I've seen a lot of changes over the 60 some odd years that I've been a resident of Centerville. I can remember when it was a little one stop sign town and not all the hustle and bustle that we have now. So, but the concern that I have is the changing of the name back from Founders Park to be the William Reed Smith Family Park, okay? And in 1955, the land that is a portion of the park, that is Founders Park now, was given to Davis County by David F. Smith and his wife, Effie Smith. And in that land gift or stipulation, the stipulation was made that the park would be named the William Reed Smith Park. William R. Smith was the first bishop in Centerville and one of the beloved community leaders in the early years of Centerville. And in that stipulation or agreement, if the property was no longer used as a city park, the land would be returned to any of the remaining living heirs of the Smith family. In the early years, the Centerville City J.C.'s started to clear the north section of that land and property, and at that time the city did a land swap to incorporate the south area with a man by the name of Marlowe Fisher, so that the land was more continuous or of better use. The William Reed Smith family was really enthusiastic about having that park established and be there for the use of the community and the city residents. The Smith family donated the shrubs, the grass seed, and money to fulfill their hopes of having a nice city park for its residents. The materials and construction of the restrooms were donated by the Smith family, and Ben Smith and his construction crew laid the block for the restrooms. The Jaycees of Centerville built the rock Bowery and supplied the manpower for the construction, the planning, and the landscaping of the city park. When the park was renamed to Founders Park, the above agreements were not able to be found in either the county or the city records. But at that time, a petition was circulated and over 200 signatures were gathered to not change the name to Founders Park and leave it as the William R. Smith Park. So it is the hopes of the Smith family were to provide that park to be used for enjoyment of all the city residents for many years in the future. It's my dad's hope and mine and any of the Smith family heirs that the current city council will see that the name of Founders Park needs to be changed to the official name of its roots and origin to meet the original stipulations as the property was given to the city and the county and be renamed as the William R. Smith Park. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Tina Allen, Centerville. My questions are in regards to the little time bomb that we got with our water bill this month. Since the money that you are entrusted with actually belongs to the Centerville citizens, I think we have a right to know, perhaps not what has happened with the perpetual care fund and the RDA money. I realize that may be a little bit sensitive. And you had a little bit of an explanation about what you're doing about it, but I think we'd like to know what kind of safeguards are being put in place so this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during the open session? Seeing none, I'll close the open session, and I'll take a moment to give a short answer, and Steve may or may not want to chime in. You asked about the perpetual care fund. The city set up a perpetual care fund, or there was an ordinance suggesting a perpetual care fund be set up in 2002. The actual mechanics of the fund were not set up. Fees were collected and put in the general fund and designated as perpetual care as related to the cemetery, but were not put in a separate fund. As such, those over the years were spent as we did maintenance for the cemetery and other things, but there was not a separate fund established where those were tracked separately, which there should have been. So there has now been, that fund has been set up and established now and tracked. There was no money that was lost, but it was it was not tracked as carefully as it should have been. It should have been set in separate funds back from 2002 onward, and was not. So what are we doing so this doesn't happen again? We obviously set up a perpetual care fund. We have brought in some additional professional accounting help to help with improved accounting procedures and methods and procedures to make sure that funds are properly accounted for and put in the right fund, not just in a general fund. And in addition to the perpetual care fund, there were some improper allocations in our RDA fund. Money that should have been in a restricted fund was in a non-restricted fund. That's an oversimplification, but that has also been corrected. I anticipate that, and Bill may want to comment on this, that our accountants and Bill and Steve have been working on kind of a summary, or when they finish their accounting efforts, have talked about providing kind of a summary report of these are the issues we found, these are the concerns, this is how it's been rectified. That work is still ongoing to make sure there aren't any other issues somewhere in our city's finances that need to be completely transparently cleaned up. And I think the City Council is looking forward to that report kind of detailing these things out, which we would anticipate in the near future, not in the not too distant future.
My hope or guess is that would be late July.
Thank you. Next item, if we move to our business agenda, we have minutes from the May 16th work session and regular city council meeting minutes. Council members, anybody have any changes to those minutes or modifications? I did not have any myself.
I move that we accept the minutes as in the staff report for May 16th work session and city council meeting 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Pick whoever you want, Katie. Moved and seconded, we approve the minutes from the work session and the regular city council meeting minutes from May 16th. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next, we have the summary action calendar. There are 2 items on that. As our finance director has retired, we have to appoint an interim finance director, and right now our recommendation is that our city manager be the interim finance director. And then we also need to award a contract for the audit, as we have hired our previous auditors to help us with accounting, so now they cannot be our auditors as they're doing some of our daily accounting. Any questions on the summary action calendar?
I did ask Marcus to stick around for this part in case you had any questions for him about the audit recommendation.
If there are no questions, I look for a motion to approve the items on the summary action calendar.
Well, I do have a question. It's for Lisa regarding the resolution for the interim finance director. Does the resolution and the city manager meet the statute as far as professional competency, or the other things that were in the statute relative to the duties of the finance manager? Are we meeting that standard?
We're doing the best we can.
You mean
I think he has
just an
his-
accounting degree or
Well,
something?
Yeah, as
it
much-
does say,
The statute.
yeah, there's a statutory piece that I was
Let me
concerned
pull
about, to
that
make
up.
sure that our resolution matches up with that, because, let's see, I'm looking for the
Utah
actual piece.
Code 10-6157.
Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong one.
Yeah, the finance director shall be a qualified person appointed and removed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the legislative body. I think at this point, this is the most qualified person we have for the job.
Is there, and nothing against Steve and his capabilities and his efforts,
It's okay.
but can we have an independent contractor fill that position?
Such as our CPA firm, you mean?
Right.
Such
Yeah.
as a partner from the CPA
Yeah.
firm?
I'd have to look into that. I know we have hired and appointed a city attorney and a city engineer appointed as that person. I'd probably want to just double check a few things if you're going in that direction.
And I don't personally have a problem with that. But I haven't actually posed the question to Marcus. But I did ask Marcus if some cities where his firm serves in an accounting contract role, do they have somebody in his firm that serves as the finance director officially? And as I recall, you said, yes, there are some cases of that.
Could you come up to the mic?
The folks on YouTube really want to hear it. All two of them.
All 5 of them, maybe?
As far as I know, the state guidelines are the city needs a treasurer and a recorder, and then the recorder is over the finance, but they can give those responsibilities to a finance director if that's how it's set up. And so I think the requirement of the finance director is more a city ordinance type thing, because there's a lot of cities out there that don't have a finance director. And so the cities that we do this for, I mean, we work technically under the direction of the recorder, but we're the finance manager and we report to the city. And so we don't make, everything a finance director would do. Like, we don't recommend raises for employees in the accounting department, that sort of thing. But does that make sense? I mean, I don't think there's not a state guideline out there that says you have to have a finance director.
Well, I agree with that. However, we have by ordinance created the position of finance director, which is at this time vacant. My other concerns, if you'll look at there's a list of things that anything in the Uniform Fiscal Procedures Act that the city recorder is designated to perform is now delegated to the finance director. Now, some of these may be to review all contracts, to review all claims. We do not have a contract with Keddington and Christensen for that scope of work. In addition, our finance director is listed as our CFO, and he has to sign that certificate on all of our reports. So again, we'd want to look at the scope of our employment contract, or the scope of our independent contractor contract with Keddington and Christensen, because I don't think it goes that far. Could we? Yes. But again, we had that discussion when we were discussing the terms of the contract, and there were some things that they were not going to be doing. So there's a lot of things that the finance director does by statute that we're just contracting for accounting services.
Yeah.
Finance director has a number of job description and statutory duties that are not covered by that contract.
Well, and Lisa, isn't this action and the concern right now that there are some things in our city ordinance that requires the signature and approval of the finance director?
Right, and that's interesting. Is this a conflict? Because on our procurement code, we have, this has to be signed by the department head, the finance director, and the city manager, depending on how much money is being spent. So that is a question at this point. But essentially, the city manager would have to be signing for both those checks.
So I would,
to some degree, the reason that I'm raising this issue is that from an accounting standpoint, the division of duties is an important concept. And so having 2 sets of eyes instead of 1 set of eyes in different offices.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Has significance to me.
so is there anything that would prevent us from designating Steve as the interim finance director now, but studying this issue as I think there's going to be some presentation on ideas for reorganizing finance department and other things. And then the council could come back and say, we want to do something differently going forward.
I'm a little concerned. As we heard in the open session, there is a concern in our city about the transparency and the appropriateness of how our finances are being handled. And I think even though we appreciate all that Steve's doing right now as he's trying to wear 2 hats, I think that a lot of that concern would be mitigated if we had 2 sets of eyes looking at it. And I would prefer to go that way, that rather than say, for right now, let's do this, and then let's come back and do something else.
So what are you suggesting?
I don't know. I don't know the correct answer. I mean, do we ask Bill, who is a CPA, to say, will you sign things for a little while we find somebody? I'm not really sure the best answer, but I know that that there's definitely a concern in our community, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that people feel reassured that we're watching and double checking.
Okay, no opposition to that. In order to keep things moving and make sure we follow our statutory duties, I'd recommend that we appoint Steve as the interim finance director. If the council, after getting advice from professionals, suggests something different, let's do something different.
Is there a rush right now?
Well, you mean without appointing somebody?
I mean,
Even
is
if we
there
just-
something that needs to be set, to be signed right now that we can't wait for 2 weeks and
Well,
study
the city
something?
manager has been acting as that. We're
He
just
has
trying to
been, but not
formalize it because it
officially.
was raised about the concerns of the statutory duties, and so I thought it was a good idea to formalize this, so you can have this discussion.
I'd prefer to wait a little bit on it, just for I want more information, and I don't want to put Steve in an awkward situation. I think he's done a lot to help us, and I just think, we're
Well,
asking for trouble.
Rather than waiting, then let me make an alternate suggestion, that we appoint Steve as the interim finance director for a period of 2 weeks, and that we're going to revisit this on the 20th.
Well,
And that you look at that between now and the 20th and let us know what our options are.
we're advising consent. The mayor is the only one who can appoint or dismiss a finance director.
Well, but there's a resolution in front of us.
Right, but whether the mayor wants to follow that resolution, totally up to him. So are you good with the 2-week period, I guess?
I'd prefer to have, given how long it takes us to make decisions, I'd prefer to have more than 2 weeks. I'm happy to discuss it, and if the council has a better approach, let's go with that. I think we're better formalizing what we've been doing for the last month with Steve as the acting finance director than waiting. And so I would recommend that you appoint him as the interim, with the understanding that if the council desires to go a different path, I'm happy to support that.
I did
once
leave
we agree to it.
the language open, just saying that this appointment and delegation shall remain in effect until a new finance director is appointed, or the duties of the finance director are filled or delegated by department restructuring or other similar action. In my opinion, other similar action would be that you just appoint someone else during this interim. I mean,
Or you could split the duties and appoint, Marcus or some outside person to do some of the duties and then move some of the other duties somewhere else. So,
That sounds fine to me. I would like to have it on the agenda for next meeting. And one of the things that we probably should ask, a source that we should ask for information from is, as Marcus said, there are many cities who don't have finance directors. So let's get a better feel for what that situation looks like.
well, you could eliminate the position of finance director, but you haven't done that
Yeah,
yet. So that's the situation that we're in. You don't have to have one, but we have created one by ordinance. And so those statutory duties have to be filled. But again, depending on how you restructure this, you don't have to have a finance director.
Right, and I don't think that's the solution. I think we want to keep it, whatever solution we do, temporary, because we have a lot more discussing to do about what the more permanent change will be. But I agree with what's been said. I think it's just a safer, more checks and balances approach to try to look at
Well,
having an outside supervisor.
I would be more than willing to remove the 2-week and say, for a 30-day period while we reevaluate what makes sense. I understand that sometimes getting things done in 2 weeks is difficult. So,
And see, I think we're in a sensitive spot right now as far as the feeling in our city, and where we're looking at the potential need for a tax increase. This is not the time to say, oh, and we put all the eggs in one basket and we have one person looking at them. I think that's a serious shooting ourselves in the foot. I don't want to go there.
So council, come with some other ideas. Let's discuss it. We're going to have a closed meeting today. This will be one of the items on the agenda. But until then, the bus has to move, and we've been acting in this fashion, and I'd recommend that you appoint an interim director and tell you to decide if you want to eliminate the position or do something else.
And I'd feel more comfortable talking about it in the closed meeting and then deciding how we're going to act on it.
So is someone willing to make the motion to appoint the city manager as an interim finance director? Any restrictions you want to put on it?
I would, yes, I would amend the resolution to say for 30-day period until it's revisited, and then suggest, and then make a motion that we approve the summary action calendar with that revision.
I can second that. I support the time limited because my major concern is since we've created the statutory duties of a finance director, we've indicated that we need auditing controls, or we're asking for those. Otherwise, the duties would reside with one individual. So I think it definitely needs to be time limited, and with as much speed and haste as we can get towards the determination of what we're doing in the future would be great.
And do you feel like the auditing controls are provided by Marcus's firm in the interim while Steve is wearing both hats?
Ultimately, the reason you have the multiple signatures is to avoid expenditures of funds that were not reviewed, and then the other one is fraud and embezzlement control. In this case, given the fact that Marcus is still very deep in the books, I'm not particularly concerned about that issue, and if we can keep Steve with at least 4 hours of rest during this period of crisis, then I'm sure that the correct expenditure of funds will take place. I mean, that's my viewpoint on that.
I agree.
So we have a motion and a second. Further discussion on the motion? If not, let's vote. Stephanie?
Nay.
Aye.
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 That passes 4-1. Thank you. Thanks, Marcus. You could start your campaigning for a finance director anytime if you'd like. Or find some other poor soul.
There wasn't even a no comment on that one.
Next item on the agenda is a public hearing on the final subdivision plat for the Chose Johnson subdivision, which we've been looking forward to for some time. Thank you. So we'll have a staff report on that first, and then we'll hear from the applicant if they'd like to speak.
Good evening, Council. I hope I have an easy one for you tonight. This is the Chose Johnson subdivision with Ron Marshall as the applicant. This is at 1150 South, 240 East, right below Pages Lane. Back in February, you all rezoned this parcel from an RM into an RL zone, and Ron has since made a final plat for a 9-lot subdivision. 2 of the homes are already on the property currently, and an additional 7 will be built shortly. There were really no major concerns during the Planning Commission reviews. Both conceptual and preliminary passed very quickly, and here we are. So if you guys have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for staff on this? Okay. Is there anything the applicant would like to say before we open for a public hearing?
No, thank you, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the council to the applicant before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing and invite anyone to comment on this. I'd ask Jake, could you put up the maybe the map or the plat, which are both, I think they're both in the
second one.
This is the land directly east of the Episcopal Church, right. And there are already homes, Ron, on the first 2 lots, correct? That are built today. And if I understand the temporary turnaround that you have there, that would be vacated after it's the road is put in.
That's correct.
So the public hearing is now open. Is there anyone who would like to come and speak to this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and turn it to council for discussion, questions, or action. Staff recommendation, the Planning Commission recommendation is to approve it with conditions you have in your staff report.
I'll make the motion that we approve the final subdivision plat for the Cheetos Johnson amended subdivision at 1150 south of 240 east, subject to the conditions and based on the findings set forth in the staff report.
I'll second that.
I moved and seconded. Any further discussion among the council? Let's do this by roll call vote. Tammy?
Aye.
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 That passes unanimously. That was
Thank you.
pretty easy for a subdivision here.
You needed an easy one.
I did go over and look at it, and I have to tell you, it's a beautiful area, and I was very impressed with those homes. They're beautiful.
They are, and our builders that are going forward will continue that.
It was a very nice area. I was very impressed. Thank you.
Do you have one builder that's going to build everything, or?
Yes.
Great.
He'll continue with the same quality that is there now. And that was the wishes of the owners, and that's why we wanted to go back to single family, because they live there and they want to continue the tradition that they've already established, so.
And if we have interested people, send them to you.
You betcha. Okay, thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you. All right, next up we have accessory building setbacks and height restrictions. And we'll look for a staff report on this. No staff report. This was tabled in the past by the council. I think, Tammy, you were missing for this, and you were a key voice that had asked or had encouraged this this change. So we'll jump right in. And
I had a question for staff. So will you refresh my memory if the CUP provision is only in the agricultural zone?
No, the CUP provision is in multiple zones. The issue will be is whether you can cap. So like the residential low has a 10% cap, but in the commercial areas, it's up to the CUP. So the example is the fly over the theater has received a CUP at the Performing Arts Center. The Megaplex IMAX theater is also taller than the 45 feet. So
what's the percentage cap in the other areas?
I don't believe there's a cap in the commercials.
And the residential cap was 10%?
10%.
Which I feel comfortable with. The 50% makes me a little bit uncomfortable because in this community, we historically have been a lot higher ratio agricultural land, but that's diminishing and it's very small. And so really all the agricultural spots that we have left are neighbored by residential low. So if we're trying to mitigate the impact to the neighbors, it's likely going to be similar to the RL situation, who your neighbors are.
Right, just think of the cap in the RL zone is 22 feet. So that's as high as you can go in the RL zone.
Right.
This cap at 50% would be 30 feet, 5 feet less than the 35-foot allowance. And Planning Commission staff talked about that. You have some rather large agricultural areas, and so that was the difficulty. You have small lots that probably ought to be rezoned to the residential low, but are not. And that would decap it at the 22 feet. But you have the larger areas of agriculture, and they have probably ability to have greater use. And so the issue is trying to balance a zone that covers large properties as well as small properties. So the 50% was allowed the 30 feet, which is still 5 feet less than the house, and increases the setback to 10 feet from the 5 for those taller structures. And it doesn't eliminate that once you go above 20 feet, between 20 and 30, every foot there's still additional setback applied as part of the CUP. So you're at 10 feet now, so you'd be at 20 feet at 30 feet, 30-foot height.
Right.
So it's just a value judgment you need to make.
Do we have a lot of structures that are in existence that would be contrary to this provision?
The smaller structures will likely be contrary both in the RL zone and the AL zone. We discussed that to you a long time ago in identifying even on Google Earth how many structures are out there that are probably now become non-conforming.
And I think you have a number of maybe separate garages and barns in the northwest area where we have some, half-acre lots, a number of them that are, or larger lots that are agricultural low, where they built very close to the property line. And some of them are two-story or at least 15 feet, they're higher structure, higher garage structures.
So I personally would feel more comfortable with with this proposal if we amended the conditional use provision to not exceed 25% of the otherwise applicable height limit. So then it's still a little bit more than the RL, but sensitive to the fact that a lot of the AL spots are going to be right next to RL. So,
Yeah, but you're really
You're choking.
penalizing and making life difficult for some people who've had this property for a long period of time.
well, we already are in making any changes because it's most likely they're not going to match the new setbacks.
Yeah, I don't think anything you do to change it from
Yeah.
is.
We're already just dealing with a reality that our homes are getting closer and closer together than they have been historically, and so we're trying to mitigate the impact of the height and proximity of what a neighbor might do. So I feel like it's reasonable to acknowledge that there might be greater need in the AL and allow for a little more than the RL. But with that being said, was this a public hearing last time?
Yes.
And so is the public hearing still open?
No, it was not.
I don't think so.
It was
I'm
not.
happy to
Public was
hold
not
a courtesy
continued.
public hearing if somebody wants. Anybody wants to speak on this. I've been trying to collect feedback from people and have only been able to find one person that was direct. Or that
I just wanted to be sure I would
impacted.
be not following procedure, but I would make a motion that we approve ordinance number 2017-13, amending section 12.31.300 of the Centerville zoning code regarding rear yard setbacks in agricultural low, with the amendments as listed in the staff report, but just changing in the special regulations paragraph, and shall not exceed 25% of the otherwise applicable height limit.
Is there a second to that? If there's not a second, that fails for lack of a second. I'd like to I don't quite understand the implication of this, and Corey, maybe you can. We don't have any
So there'd be-
diagrams here. but-
There'd be a 20-foot height limit, which would require a 10-foot setback. But then with the CUP process, which, as we well know, you would need to allow, in essence, then it could go up to 50% higher than the 20%, or than the 20
Your motion would
feet.
cap it at 25, so you would be at 25 feet in height rather than 30.
Mhm.
That's where I have a problem. I have a problem with that. It's not enough for a barn.
Not enough.
How high, do you know how high Terry Bleak's new barn is?
I don't offhand. They're in an RL, so we did review the height. Remember,
Oh,
the
they're in
height is
RL, not
measured to
AL?
the mid-peak.
Oh, it's
And
mid-peak, so that's not going to be, but the
Right.
peaks are going to be
Right,
above
that's
25.
mid-peak, so the peaks are going to be
So
above.
now your peak is adjusted in height by your
Mm-hmm.
slope. Instead of 4-to-1, 6-12.
And again,
those
if
times.
we're looking to existing structures, it's likely that there are other ways we're already stepping on the toes by the changing of this. And so my intent is to, looking forward to a new building.
So
to
are
mitigate
you
its
trying to,
impact on neighbors.
are you trying to limit the setback, or are you or increase the setback, or are you trying to limit the height of
I
buildings?
think she's trying to do both.
It's already written in that as you increase your height, you move back farther.
Correct.
Okay, and so I'm just saying, though, that I still think it should be reasonable that the general principle is that your accessory building shouldn't greatly overpower the size of your homes.
Right.
And so that's the intent.
The one caution I'd give you is that the building that's at the angst driving this in the agricultural zone is 6 feet. This would move that building for 4 feet because it stayed under the 20. And so I personally think that the 4 feet is irrelevant that's driving this. And so I concerned on your agricultural pieces, if we are considering, and it seems to me the council is moving more and more the direction, Jennings Lane in that area, of preserving agricultural uses. If that's your goal, then I think you need to count into that those zones need some substantial value of those large properties for acreages to have use of buildings on whatever might be envisioned in those buildings. I realize and recognize that we have island in the RL, but in all intent and purposes of all of the community plans, it's moving to the RL. Those are just slower than their surrounding neighbors.
So can you repeat for us this, I mean, what prompted this is the barn there at the corner of Porter
Right.
and Main. What impact would this ordinance have had on that? You said it would
Moved it 4 feet,
moved it from 5 feet out to 9 feet.
6 feet to the 10 feet.
6 feet to 10 feet.
Because it's a two-story.
They're at 6 feet now.
It's above 10 feet, so it has that little second story into it. So it'd move it 6 feet.
And would it restrict the height as
That,
written?
they would have to then increase, they didn't go higher. So that building would stop automatically at 10 feet. And they would be in compliance with the new ordinance if it were moved 4 feet.
And with Tammy's suggested modification, would it have impacted the height of that building?
No, because it's not tall enough to get a conditional use.
Corey made my point before I got to the mic, but I'm really concerned that we are signaling to AL, you're not wanted anymore by doing something like this. When we say, well, homes are getting closer, we're encroaching, then are we signaling we're done with AL, or do we want to preserve it? I mean, part of the character of the city is a little bit of the patchwork of AL that still exists. And yeah, there are 2 horses down at the end of the street from where I live, and that is really novel, and the kids love it. Do I particularly care that there are horses down there? No, there are some neighbors who want them gone because this is not an appropriate use for a neighborhood. I'm just concerned, like Corey said, that we could be significantly impacting it, not necessarily through the 4 feet, 6 feet, but from a signaling perspective as to what we believe the value of those properties should be. That's
Sure.
my concern with it.
Sure, and that's a legitimate concern, and I will say that I do value the existing and remaining AL that we have in the city, and that patchwork feel is just fine with me, but it does lend itself to some special considerations. And I would say that the general principle, in an ideal world, it's very difficult to write ordinance that isn't too prohibitive and isn't too lenient, right? But in an ideal world, I do believe that accessory buildings should be considered in relation to the size of the structures around them. And so in a more simplified way, that's what I'm trying to address here.
I can see your point there.
Yeah.
What I've noticed in some cities, and San Francisco is a great example of this with the gentrification of certain neighborhoods, you'll have individuals move in, they'll buy a building right next to a club, and then they'll complain about the noise until such time as the club is shut down. And in some cases, I'm a big believer, if you're buying right next to an agricultural property, don't complain about the fertilizing that takes place at the end of the year sort of thing, because you bought knowingly next to that property. And that's the peaceful coexistence balance that you're talking about. But I really have a hard time when you remove the rights of existing property owners for the incoming to try and court new people at the expense of existing property owners.
So it sounds like there's not support for those changes. Is there support for this ordinance as written, as you directed the Planning Commission to work on it?
I'll try again and make the motion to approve ordinance number 2713 as written in the staff report.
Is there a second to that?
I would second that
Okay.
with hesitance.
With hesitance. Remember, you
Well,
are.
the second means that now we're going to discuss it some more.
Yes, so now we'll discuss it. Remember, you guys are the ones that asked the Planning Commission to do this. So they've done it, but I understand sometimes I
guess one of the things I would ask, that I've seconded, is there some way to treat differently properties, and I'm not sure what the line of demarcation is, let's just say below an acre and above an acre. And maybe it should be below a half an acre and above a half an acre, but I'll start with below an acre and above an acre.
Because everything that's agricultural should be a half acre or more.
Right.
We have a few
So
very
maybe-
strange abnormalities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go the acre.
Yeah, you certainly could explore that. I think you're going to see the advice of staff and potentially legal counsel. I don't want to speak for legal matters. I think you see, it's tough to take a same zoning district and start segregating people in that district. It really ripens things for suits and complaints and problems, because they're saying, well, based on this, I'm treated differently than that, but yet I'm in the same zone. And so once you start getting challenges to the same zones, and you start saying, here's the different terms, you lend to where accusation of favoritism comes along, even if you're not trying to. You lend yourself and ripen yourself to those claims. So the cleaner way is to create different zones and then stick with those different zones and treat everybody the same. Because once you start taking people in like rights and saying, you're blessed, you're unblessed, for lack of better terms, it really ripens the conflict.
Well, and to that point, I would just say I think that that's part of my concern of the direction, is that I treasure the existing and remaining agricultural land in this city. But I think if at this point we just say, well, we're going to stop granting the right to switch it over to RL, where that's happened historically for 100 years or more, that I feel very uncomfortable with that.
I've tried to stay out of this, but I admit Jake, if you'll pull up the ordinance, please, or the staff report.
Non-voting doesn't mean you have to stay out of it.
Yeah. Sorry, next. I guess I've got them all together, but I guess it's the staff report where it shows well, you can see here, keep the accessory building 2-story or greater than 10 feet in height, all sizes has to be 10 feet back. Does this mean that if I'm in an agricultural low zone and I try to build a shed that's 12 feet high, or an accessory garage that's have an average of 12 to 15 feet, single story, my setback is much more than those in the residential low zone that build a similar building?
No, you're just separating by 2 feet. The residential low does the exact same thing, but it starts at 8 instead of 10.
So it used to be, so did we already make that change to
We've already
residential?
made that change.
Okay, so I built an accessory garage, it was 3 feet off the property line. And now it would have to be.
Correct. This was the discussion of how many nonconformities have been created by that change. And I would say a number of nonconformities have. And so there is, as I described, a lack of better terms, loophole. The loophole is that an existing building, not a new one, that doesn't conform to the new standards because it was built legally prior to, can go to the Board of Adjustment, let's say, for an addition. And then there's criteria for the Board of Adjustment to look at for the addition to that building, which can honor the original setback if it meets that criteria. But you've created that workload. That was staff's warning, is you create that workload. Is that terrible? No, I like job security. I keep promoting it. But you create a burden on the owners to go through that workload. And the example I best point to is that likely until they're, again, I use bad terms, ratted out, it's like a basement. You're supposed to get a permit when you remodel your basement and do your electrical and everything that as such. How many people actually do that? Not very many. I think you're going to have the same problem with some of these, little lean-tos and smaller places. As long as they're not that substantial, large structure, they're going to do little additions and lean-tos on them because until they're complained about, they'll probably get away with it. So they probably won't go through the legal process. And then that sets up the future. If something really does come down to play, then you have to determine, was the original structure legal? Was the addition legal? And so all in all, I'll just be honest with you, I think the change to the residential is not as wise as it should have been, because I think the way we normally treat backyards, we were probably okay. All you're doing here now is mimicking the residential low, but you're changing it from the 8-foot to the 10-foot, so that's a 2-foot change. And then it's 22 feet maximum height in an RL. And if you adopt it as you're doing, it's 20 feet because of the additional height you can get, an additional setback. So
in residential, I know I should have already got this, but how high in residential can an accessory building go?
20 feet to the midpoint, and that would be an 8-foot setback. You can get a CUP to 22 feet.
That just seems so high to me for residential. I'm not as concerned about the AL, but for residential. I mean, when I go to some of these homes and the backyards are.
Yeah, but think about the residential. That's not that, it seems high because you have a perceived height. But if you look at what people use garages that go to 2-story levels for, your low point of your roof is 15, 16 feet just to get an RV into it with an air conditioner on top. So if you want them to do a flat roof, we can do that. But most people don't like to do flat roofs. They'd like to at least do a 412 pitch.
And it looks better.
And it looks better. Some like to do the, go to Ford Canyon. They're doing the 12 pitches because it's matching the castle look. And 22 feet is not that high in that kind of design style.
So you can act on this, you can table it and ignore it again. I think there's value in having continuity between the residential and the agricultural, but this is a challenging conundrum. To me, some of this seems challenging.
Certainly not a perfect answer, and it's not a make it or break it kind of thing, but I felt like to ask the Planning Commission to visit this was a step in the right direction to just at least acknowledge that there is an impact. When lots are getting smaller and backyards are getting smaller, then when something very tall gets built in a backyard, it affects your daily existence.
So how does that interplay with someone else's right to have the barn and hay storage?
Right.
Or to have a garage to park their RV, or
Right.
in my case, a lawnmower and a truck in.
It's a very difficult
That's a very
question.
tall lawnmower.
No, it's a 8-foot, 10-foot. I think I have like a 9-foot ceiling. It's not, but it's over 10 feet average midpoint because it has a sloped roof.
Slept roof.
So I would have had to move it back, quite a bit further back. I guess another 5 feet back from the property line, which it's not going to really benefit my neighbors much. I don't think. It would just, in my opinion.
Right, but the difficulty is in some situations it would, because every situation is so unique. That's what's so hard about it.
I mean, I guess my issue is with the 10 feet or greater. I can see for structures that are 20 feet high to have that back, but for a 12-foot garage, it doesn't seem like we should have to have such a big setback compared to a 6 or 7-foot shed. Okay, so you've thought about it. You don't seem like you're ready to make any decisions.
Well, you have a move in a second, so.
Oh, wait, we do have a motion in a second. You're right. Excuse me. We have a motion and a second to act on this ordinance tonight. Thank you for that. So, unless there's an objection, I'm going to call the question, and we'll start the voting with.
I didn't know you could do that. I thought that had to be voted on now.
We have a motion and a second. Let's start the voting with Stephanie. You are voting, a yes vote is to vote to implement the ordinance as written.
Nay.
Nay.
It all hinges on you, Bill.
Oh, that's not necessarily true. There's two more. I'm in the middle. Nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Okay, that fails 4-1. So now we've got,
Which is fine, because I agree with Corey. It wasn't an ideal solution, and it's a complicated situation that requires a complicated ordinance, and I'm not sure if staff is willing to support a complicated ordinance and if council's interested.
He said something about job security, so I'm sure we can make it as complex
We
as.
can tackle that another time.
What is the definition, of course, the question's over, so this is probably a moot point. What again is the definition of AL and AM?
That's a great question. I've had, I think even Lisa answered. The AL is our single family along with those agricultural animals, typical, so it's a single family zone. The AM is like a processing, so you're actually doing egg processing. So somebody's raising the chickens, the eggs are coming over, so it's a commercial use ag zone that's in the ordinance for whatever reason, because it was done in 2003, so I get to blame it on the predecessor because I came in 2004. I think it's just a structural agricultural zone created by the consultant in case you ever wanted to use a commercial ag facility zoning district.
but we have no zone, we have no property in city that's zoned AM.
Correct.
So one alternative, which you don't like, well, no, which you kind of do like, would be to create an agricultural low 1 and an agricultural low 2, where
Yes,
one
you
is
can
1 acre or less,
Yes.
and the other is 2 acres or more. Or
Yes.
more than 1 acre, excuse me, would be
Yes.
2 acres or more.
And distinguish between low and reformat the medium to something else and decide whether you want to keep the agricultural industry and label that something entirely different. But yes, you could do that.
I
And
would
that's not a
like-
complicated ordinance, so
That part would be pretty easy.
it'd probably be pretty easy.
Because I would, when this was sent to the Planning Commission, I, along with others, was concerned because of some of the things, because of the property that Paul mentioned that caused this, at least to start. And I think the protection for people is appropriate. I'm just not sure how and where we're penalizing other people.
I think, you're addressing it from the heights, and I think that's a good thing because that's created the angst that created the discussion. But I think in all honesty, if we went back and looked at segregating the zones, we'd also start to look at the agricultural use points being applied. My professional opinion is a horse on a half acre is not an appropriate place to keep a horse. And so we'd staff would go in and start restructuring a half acre lot of agriculture in the point system as well as larger lots or wherever we divide it, an acre, 5 acres. I mean, there's a myriad of ways to create the division, but I don't think we would just create a separation just for the height and setbacks. We would create an additional saying, this zone is for this type of agricultural activities and this zone is for this type. And I professionally think a half acre, as well as personally, I rarely share a personal opinion, but a horse on a half acre is not really a healthy place for a horse, of course.
I would like to suggest that we send this back to the Planning Commission to look at being able to expand it, and would make that motion.
So to be able to expand, I think.
Expand this into something that is more recognizing of the difference between a half an acre and 3 acres or 4 acres or whatever the case may be.
So you have a motion to,
Well, we can't remand because we voted it down, right?
you voted it down, but you can ask this.
This is totally separate.
No, I'm asking this is separate. I'm
Totally
asking
separate new issue.
I'm asking the Planning Commission to look at it again and to consider the need to revise what we just turned down, recognizing that there are differences in a half an acre property and 3 acre property.
And if they're going to relook at it, I'm really concerned about 25 feet. I mean, I don't know how you do it, because in a lot of properties, that's fine. But in some of them that have these small backyards, you put a 25 foot in the next backyard, you've totally ruined a home. I'm concerned about 25 feet.
But it's their home. If
No,
The neighbors.
The neighbor's home. 25 feet if you don't, I mean, some people's backyards
If
don't.
it's done
seem like-
right, you ruin the sight lines
Yeah,
for another
but-
home, that's
but-
true.
But I mean, that's, if somebody builds next to you, you could say, my,
Yeah, but it can't be that close. I mean, they've got to have, what is a backyard now? Is it 20 feet or 30 feet?
15.
so the main building setback is 20 feet. The
Yeah,
rear
you have,
yard.
for both AL and RL, is a 20-foot setback. for
And
the
your
rear.
setback on the residential is 8 foot now.
So but you've got to have a 20-foot backyard.
Correct.
So if you only have 20 feet, and then they have 10 feet, and they put up a 25-foot building,
It's gonna
30
be pretty
feet from
skinny.
your house, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that theoretically, you're exactly right. The issue with a half-acre lot of an ag zone, the house is now going to be setting deep.
Right, but so I'm
And
concerned.
then you have the 20 feet that could be a problem, so.
I guess I'm looking at as what you're looking at the agricultural, I'm looking at the RL. I would like them to look at that again and see if we want to limit the height.
That's currently at 20 feet permitted, 22 CUP.
20 feet is not that much.
Well, let's think about it individually further and come back. with-
I would like them, I don't, on the contrary, I think that the way it's written with accessory buildings, a 2-story or greater of 10 feet in height with a setback of 8 feet, I think that's excessive. That I don't see the difference between a 12-foot or 15-foot building.
Yeah,
It's not that tall.
we use the 1-story definition. The zoning code's built around 1 story, and the 10 feet is your 1 story.
Quick, with your laser tape measure eyes, what is the beam, what's the ceiling, right in this room?
Randy's the expert.
Randy, estimate, what's the beam, what's the ceiling?
Up here,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably 12 feet.
That's more than 12. From the floor to there.
Plus or minus a couple inches is okay.
I can find out.
No, it's fine. I was saying for purposes
Yeah.
of discussion, that's what you're talking
12,
about.
12 and 24, yeah.
25.
And I would draw our memory to like the cemetery issue, the discussion of the retaining wall and how concerned those neighbors were and how this council seemed pretty apt to listen to those concerns, that a 16-foot retaining wall that completely blocks the sightlines that they were used to was a concern. So it's a similar kind of thing.
Well, that was the homeowner concern. My concern was liability cost, and the sightlines was actually last on my list of concerns. It was first for the homeowner, wasn't first on my list of concerns. I hope they hear
And the-
that and they're not too upset, but that was not
And
my
the flooding
primary issue.
possibilities and things.
That would have been unfortunate, but it was not on the top of my list.
Okay, so, Bill, did you make a motion to send this back? Was there a second? We've been discussing this. Is there a second to Bill's motion to send this back to the Planning Commission for more discussion?
Corey, how busy is the planning commission right now?
You haven't figured this out. We keep waiting till you sit down to ask the next
What's
question.
that again?
How busy are they right now?
Well, they've never gotten to the goals that they want to get to yet.
Let's leave them be.
Because I thought we had sent back to them the idea of creating R1, R2, going back to a more finite system rather than our 3 zones.
Talked
But-
about that, but I don't know if that was ever reached
I don't
as a
think you ever put it
consensus.
Oh, there's time for a motion then. No.
Yeah, I would like to see that.
Priority-wise, I would put that higher than this, but I mean, we're getting off track a bit.
Yeah, I mean,
we
maybe
are off
let's just
track.
make that another agenda item to discuss for a future time. and time.
If you'd like to, somebody write up a description of that so we can have a structured
we know,
discussion,
yeah,
and I'll put it
what
on the
we're
agenda.
talking about.
Okay.
Let's try to limit our unstructured discussions. Speaking of things for the Planning Commission to do, we have item number 5, which is a request for the Planning Commission to consider amending the table of uses in our zoning code text regarding the commercial medium zone and the Main Street overlay. This is specifically with the concern of selling the existing fire station and building a new one. As you're aware, there's a construction company that's interested in the existing fire station, but it is now not a permitted use, although we have 2 other construction companies on Main Street. So I asked Corey to put this on the agenda and hope that the City Council would support sending this to the Planning Commission to make that change, as would the entire fire board.
I would support that. I would request that the Planning Commission take into consideration the probable reasons for the removal in the first place and the design standards that we have now. And I have a surety that something could get written up that is sensitive to those reasons and those desires for moving towards a quality Main Street in the future, but still being flexible with the uses that are allowed.
And I think it makes sense to have them consider screening and other
Yeah.
requirements for that type of a use. On
Tall
Main Street.
garages to put vehicles in.
Any further discussion, or are folks amenable to a motion on this?
I don't understand why this is coming from, I'm lost.
So
I thought this was supposed to be coming like from an applicant or something. I don't understand why we're doing it.
So
So that we can know if
the applicant can
realistic.
apply, and the applicant has spoken with Corey, but we, as a city council, we can also request it. Corey did not allow me to request it without your
Yeah,
consent.
this is where I sometimes a thorn in everybody's side. Not sometimes, more often than not. It says initiation for zone map and text amendments. Initiation, proposed amendments to the zoning code and the zoning map may be initiated by the city council, planning commission, or property owner affected by the proposed amendment. And then it also recognizes the property owner given an agent authorization to someone for that. And so the issue at hand is not even staff can say, put something on agenda and change it, because I think this is what we need to do. The purpose of putting in that stringent policy is so that you can't have a staff member or a non-elected person or a non-voting person, sorry, Mayor, talking and having discussions and saying, I think that's a good idea, now put that on and get that amended. And now I think that's a good idea. So it eliminates the potential manipulation of a code on a frequent basis for a cause. So it takes a
And
body.
also leaves us with a lot of really bad old things that need to get cleaned up.
Yeah. It does. It hampers the process from making everything, really clean and perfect, because it takes a body or a property owner the right to petition their government to make those changes, so that you don't have this ongoing, well, I didn't get it this way, I didn't get it that way, staff's, let's change it this way, oh, I think that's a good idea. And so I told the mayor that this needs to be, if the SHOOP, who I discussed is not supplying the application, which is a potential, then, well, the city would have to give authorization to that SHOOP, because they're not the property owner. So it takes the city council in this case to initiate that action for us to go back and notice and so forth.
So now I'm really confused. And the confusion is that for this to be on the agenda for the council to bring this forward.
I can put something on the agenda.
Right.
But I can't tell staff, take this to the planning.
Initiate
commission
the
and change it.
process.
So, but that almost sounds like it's the same intent. It's like you can keep manipulating the agenda to put put rezoning requests on rather than having people go through the process.
That is correct. And the check and balances, though, is it takes three of you to agree.
Understood. I'm just saying it
But yes.
sounds like the two overlap quite a bit in intent. Observation, not dogma, just observation.
But it's a lot easier to put something on the agenda and have you discuss it than to actually prepare something. There's a lot of staff work that goes behind the scenes that it's better to make sure we have a majority of the council that wants to move in that direction.
Well, understanding that, but we did have a pseudo petitioner come in, a developer, to show us what they wanted to do on 1270 West, and I was the first one to say, wait a minute, this didn't go through the planning commission. We're measuring, as the developer said, we want to measure the temperature of the council. So I'm just trying to be consistent as far as that goes.
Yeah, you're right. These are the difficulties and the arguments that we have quite frequently, not every day, but quite frequently with folks, is Well, can I get who can change it? The city council, you know? Well, let's have them put on it. Well, it's hard for staff to say, hey, go lobby each council member individually and see if you can get a majority out of them. We don't say that. You know, then you get an applicant that comes in and says, well, I don't really want to finish it all until I know, okay, now what do we do here? Because we don't want you to go talk to the individuals and get the temperature that way. So it's you're right, and consistency is the best message.
Well, and I wouldn't want the developer that we said go through the application process to take umbrage at favoritism in process,
Right.
whether it's a fire district or not. That's my concern. If I were in the developer's shoes, given the direction that we took, I'd be, wait a minute, what's the special dispensation? I mean, granted, you could say public safety a little different. I mean, there's arguments either way. I'm just trying to be consistent.
So the issue before you is, are you willing to direct the Planning Commission to revisit the table of uses for Main Street? Or do you want to kill the new fire station and increase our wait times and have people blame?
Wow.
Hey, YouTube, are you watching?
Just trying to move this forward.
That was not a telegraphed guilt trip at all.
I guess, so my question was, I'm not understanding.
Okay.
Are we expediting it by doing this?
No,
Because-
No.
No, and that's what I was going to clarify. I view this as an important part of the process, and this isn't weird or fishy at all to me, because the planning staff basically works at the direction of the council, and the way that they spend their time they work at the direction of the council. And so does the Planning Commission. And so if someone has a proposal for what they think would be an improvement in our code, this is just the reasonable first step. You come to the council to get permission for staff and the Planning Commission to spend their time on that. So this is the very appropriate step for when there's this kind of desire, and can be kind of a quick and dirty decision. Do we feel like this is worthy of the planning staff and commission's time to have this debate and discussion? And it is not indicative at all as to whether or not we would vote on the end result after we have more information from planning staff and commission. So I would make a motion that we do direct the Planning Commission to consider an amendment to the zoning code text, table of uses regarding construction, sales, and service in the commercial medium zone.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Further discussion?
Can you remind me, did that developer already own the property?
This property, the fire station?
No, not this one, the
I
one
was
George
giving the
referred to.
example of the hotel apartments.
They had part of it under control. They didn't own all of it, is my understanding. They only had part of it.
They didn't own any, they had an option, I thought.
I think.
I think they own the corner piece, but UDOT owns
UDOT.
a piece in the back.
Oh, okay.
If you're talking about the 1250 West and Parish corner, the right development.
That's the example I was using, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if
So
it's-
they could come to us
the
because
potent-
they owned the property. And in this case, we're saying that the contractor who's considering buying doesn't own it, and so he can't make the motion, the initial step?
He's happy to make that petition. I don't know, Corey listed it as the fire service. They own the property. We deeded it over to them.
They would have to give agent authorization, whoever the actual owner of the property, have to give agent authorization to that person to
It's
represent.
essentially the same thing. There are two bodies that trying to make a deal, depends on how something works out or not, and so this process just needs to happen if the council's interested in it happening, and it's
If you're not
perfectly
interested-
legitimate if the council's not
If you're not
interested.
interested in it, then.
That's fine, too.
The fire board needs to know really quick. as well.
Yeah, but today you're not voting on
no.
the
That's-
substance
that was
of
just
the
a
issue.
commentary.
It's just
That's
who's going to pay
inappropriate
for the
commentary.
application to be processed.
Inappropriate commentary on my part. So we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? No further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? I don't think we can pass it 2-0.
Let's
You're
take a
very
roll.
good.
Let's do a roll call
Let's
vote.
take a roll call vote.
Those in favor? Tammy?
Aye.
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 Aye. There's still time for action when it's actually comes back up.
That's true.
You sent plenty of things to the planning commission and had them work on it, and it came back and you rejected it, so.
Boy, you were on.
Not us.
It's going to be a good night. Nay, just for the fun of it.
Okay, that passes 4-1. Thank you. We're finally to our main event. 45 minutes late.
Almost everybody's gone.
We're not very good at estimating our time, but we're to the tentative.
I take that personally.
Keep estimating the way you
Corey,
are.
don't leave.
Don't adjust.
We're to the FY18 tentative budget public hearing, where we'll cover a number of issues. I'm going to turn this to Steve and Jake for a staff report.
Okay. This public hearing has been advertised in a newspaper notice to meet the state legal requirement and on the websites and so forth. But also, in addition, we sent the budget newsletter out with the utility bill and attempted to address maybe the important things for our residents to know. And perhaps the most important thing was that you are discussing the possibility of a property tax increase for things such as more street maintenance money, for example, particularly that item and possibly others. The budget newsletter tried to indicate very clearly that if you, as a council, actually propose a property tax increase officially, then the adoption of the budget will be postponed. Normally, it would happen on the second meeting in June, but with the property tax increase proposal, you would postpone that until August per state law, and you would go through a public process that requires notice in the paper and so forth, and then have a public hearing in August specifically regarding the proposed tax increase, after which you then would adopt your budget. So for those listening tonight, if the council does want to proceed with proposing a property tax increase, then there will be another public hearing specifically for that. But we will proceed with this public hearing tonight regarding the tentative budget, and a few things I want to explain before you open it up for a public hearing, Mayor.
Please.
Okay. State law does require that the public hearing include proposed compensation for appointed officials, including the Justice Court judge. Also says if you have proposed increases for elected officials, their compensation, that has to be a subject of the public hearing. There is no proposal for increasing the elected officials' compensation. The city has adopted some years ago an ordinance that said every 4 years that would be reviewed. And this is just the third year of the 4-year period, so next year that would be up for review as to what the mayor and council members are compensated. And as far as the appointed officials, other than the Justice Court judge, the appointed officials like the treasurer, the recorder, the city manager, the department heads, those are all, their salaries are determined by a pay grade system. And those pay grades are adjusted potentially from year to year. And their movement within those pay grades is according to salary administration guidelines, which the council adopts each year. These guidelines not only apply to the appointed officials, they apply to all of the city employees that are year-round employees, basically. So I wanted to review the essence of that. Jake, will you pull up, and you may have to go back to the work session. Well, no, I think I enclosed it under both places. The guidelines, the salary administration guidelines. If you'll pull those up and go to the, yeah, let's, to the second page particularly, but I will say that one of the things the guidelines provides for is a market adjustment to the pay ranges. The last couple of years, that market adjustment has been 1%. In a work session prior to this meeting, I recommended that market adjustment be another 1%, although if there's no market adjustment, then I don't have heartburn over that either. The data that I've supplied to the council, I think, could result in either one of those. The market adjustment does not automatically translate into an increase for the employee because we don't have cost of living pay raises in our compensation system. Many entities have a cost of living raise plus a step raise, the combination of the two. We do not have steps in our plan. We do not have cost of living raises, but we have a pay matrix as shown on the screen. This is the matrix that applies to the current fiscal year. In other words, this was adopted last year for the current fiscal year to guide pay raises. And most employees will be in what's known as the merit range, in the middle there of that table, and they are eligible for those percentages of increases depending on which quartile they're in the pay range, and that means each quartile is 25% of the pay range, so it's divided into four quartiles. And if your employee's salary is lower in the range, they are entitled to a bigger percentage increase if they're meeting the performance standards, a higher percentage increase than those in the upper part of the pay range. That's pretty typical. You'll find in compensation plans for governments. Even though many of those plans have steps, the steps in the lower half will be greater than the steps in the upper half. Similar to that, the percentages diminish as you go up in the pay range. As I considered what to recommend in the way of these percentages this year, I believe that we should strengthen the lower two quartiles by 0.5%, because moving employees up to that midpoint more quickly is in the interest of attracting and retaining the qualified workforce. Once they hit the midpoint, I don't believe that you need those percentages above that. And so I am recommending we leave the percentages above the midpoint as they are in the current guidelines, and that we add 0.5% to the percentages in the lower half of the pay range. I don't believe that's excessive if you become familiar with what's happening out there in compensation plans. For example, the fire district, they have a step system. The lower half of the range is 4% steps. The upper half is 2% steps. But they also, their system allows a cost of living adjustment each year, and this year it's at 2.1%. So fire employees will be getting either a 6.1% increase or a 4.1% increase when you combine that, when you talk about the lower half of the range or the upper half. The steps vary from city to city, but I think these will be, that I've recommended, you'll find them to be reasonable in comparison. In terms of the justice court judge, he's not assigned to a pay range. There's no point in assigning the judge to our compensation plan because the state law dictates what you can do with a judge salary. We've reviewed this before, but for the benefit of those listening, the judge, the State Administrative Office of Courts determines what each justice court judge's equivalent workload is, meaning equivalent of a district court judge, based on their number of cases, and some way they translate that into a portion of a full-time district court judge. and ours is .4 something this year. It's trending down over the last few years, that equivalent percentage. And then the guidelines from the state say you have to pay that judge somewhere between 50% and 90% of that. If it's a, let me back up a minute just to illustrate. If it's a 50% workload determination or equivalent determination, then you take 50% of the district court judge's pay, and then you have to pay the your judge between 50 and 90% of that 50%. Follow me? Okay. And so we get a letter every year that says it needs to be within this range, and our judge is within that range. But it does also, the state law says you need to, you can't give your judge a lesser increase than what represents the average of what your employees in general are getting. Now, if you choose to give him more, you can, but you can't give him less. So in the past few years, we have determined what funding does it take to fund that merit range in this pay matrix, and what does that funding represent as a percentage of all the salaries of the employees being governed by this pay range. And if that's, for example, 2.5% or 3%, then that becomes the pay range that I've recommended to you for the judge. And that's what I would do again this year. So that's a kind of an overview of the compensation plan, how it affects our appointed officials and judge, as well as the other employees of the city. This agenda shows proposed revisions to the tentative budget. We were going to review those in the work session prior to this meeting tonight, but we didn't have time. Those will be reviewed in a future work session more in depth. I guess I could, we did attach that to the work session, so I don't know if you want me to review any of that here tonight before you go into the public hearing, or just allow the public to see that, and you'll have a chance to talk about it, review it in a work session subsequent to this meeting. So unless you want me to address other issues, that's my report before you open the public hearing.
Well, our public has been very patient with us tonight, waiting a long time, and we'd love to hear from them. At some point, I want to go through all the changes to the tentative budget, but at this point, let's go ahead and open the public hearing and invite those who have been so patient to wait to provide any comments on the tentative budget, and then we can discuss recommended changes and modifications. So the public hearing is now open. We'd encourage you to come and speak if you've got a comment on the budget. We hope somebody does.
Steve Allen from Centerville. I feel obligated to come up here and mention my name. That's it.
You're on record as being here. Huh?
There you go.
Okay.
Anyone else who would like to comment on the budget?
They're waiting for that one in August, I think.
Seeing no other takers, I guess we'll close the public hearing.
And so the council's options now are to decide what you want to discuss in the time in this meeting and when you want to meet again in a work session.
Do you want to go through?
We do need to make a determination as to whether you're going to propose a property tax increase, because we have to report that.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think you need to decide sooner rather than later, because we're already behind on getting the public information out. So again, we're 2 weeks later.
And I would say the answer is yes.
Okay. Well, let me tell you what I need to know so that we can get some of these notices out that the statutes require.
By the way, if 7 of us attended the property tax meeting this morning. Tammy and Bill and 5 staff members, including Marcus. It was a very helpful meeting, I thought, a couple-hour meeting.
And I'm sure we'll have more questions for them. But, so again, the property tax increase is set forth in 2 different sections of the state code. One is the taxes in Title 59, and then the other is the budgeting process in Title 10. So we have to mesh those 2 together. But under the Title 59, it says, on or before June 22nd, if the city intends to exceed the certified tax rate, the city shall notify the county auditor of the city's intent to exceed the certified tax rate, so I want a yes or no, and the amount by which the taxing entity proposes to exceed the certified tax rate. So we need to start talking numbers very quickly. We did just receive ahead of schedule our certified tax rate, so we can start plugging in numbers because we'll need to know our average residential house, our average commercial, and how much you're intending so that we can get the numbers out on how much that increases for everyone. But you can also plug the number into their the state's software and say, most cities say we want X amount of dollars, and then it'll plug in the certified tax rate. Now you may say, I'm assuming you can go the opposite and just plug in.
I don't think so.
No?
I
Okay,
think
so you're just gonna have to
revenue-based.
pick and choose maybe the percentage,
the only
but
input
Jake
field.
could figure that out and then put in the dollar amount, because since we haven't done a tax increase for so long, it's very low, so.
But I will say that the certified rate that they showed us for Centerville generates very close to $1 million. So it's 980, you got it there? What is it, Jake? 980?
988, 979.
So, I mean, for simple math, you can figure out what a 50% increase or a 25% increase is going
That's
to.
very easy, that's nice, easy numbers, okay.
Yeah.
So if you could, it'd be great to know the number, but I doubt you have any data to make that decision tonight. But there's another statute in Title 10, and this is talking about preparing the budget, but it also has provisions on the tax rate. And it says before June 15th. Now, if you were listening, the other number was June 22nd. The city recorder or finance director shall certify the ordinance or resolution setting the levy to the county auditor. So again, you know, the county's saying, yes, we'd like to know that. But then in our meeting today, they said, well, we don't really need to know till June 30th. So I'm not comfortable going beyond June 22nd. So if you want to make that decision on June 30th, but you could decide tonight, yes, we want to do it, we can at least send out letters saying we want to do it, but then by the next week, next meeting on June 20th, we need to decide the amount so we can notify them by June 22nd how much we want to do, how much of a tax increase, the dollar amount and percentage, which Jake can figure out. The reason that we really have to get going on this is because the county then is preparing those documents that go out by June 22nd, or I mean July. They go out in the mid-July, end of July, to every homeowner, resident, property owner. So it seems like it's a quick decision, but it really is. The county said they're on a calendar year. They started their process in February.
Well, and I would say it's not a quick decision because right now it's a proposal for a discussion, right?
True.
So, I mean, I would say the more time we give ourselves to have a thorough discussion with our citizenry, the better. And so to me, I feel very comfortable.
And I don't know if we
saying,
can
yes,
do
let's
this.
have that
The
discussion.
county's talked about setting that date as well for the Truth in Taxation public hearing. I would like to suggest that we request August 8th. As of this morning, the county said they've only heard from 1 or 2.
Well, and only one of those affects us, as Heidi said afterwards. I talked to Heidi Vudecker, and she said that all we have to be concerned about is those taxing entities that have overlapping taxes with our residents. So we're only concerned about the fire district.
Yeah.
And they've selected August 7th.
Or 6th, isn't it the 6th or is
No, the 7th.
The 7th?
This is a Sunday.
The 7th is the
6th would be
Monday.
a Sunday.
So it's
So
Monday
we
this.
got that. So Monday, August 7th.
is the fire district.
Is the fire district.
And again, the reason I'm
at 6
suggesting
p.m.
you pick the 8th is because if you want to have more decision-making process after the public hearing, you would still have one more meeting,
On the
August 15th, before your budget and certified tax rate is due by August 22nd.
And I like the idea of having a separate night just for that public hearing.
Is that the same?
Well, I'm also going to suggest that you have a separate public hearing for the truth in taxation, but also a public hearing on your budget, because I'm assuming this tentative budget, we're making amendments, and I would like to have another public hearing on the tentative budget as amended.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
everybody has time to comment prior to adopting the final budget.
I'm
Well,
sure
we
what
had so much comment tonight, so.
Well, but we haven't signaled yes on a tax increase yet, and that will change the optics on
Turnout,
whether people
probably.
look or not. So since I rarely say things about campaign promises, I promised that there would be a tax increase. I made sure people understood that this was not a question. It would have to happen because of where we would be, and we're at that point. And that's not a campaign promise anyone wants to lead out with is, hey, I'm going to increase your taxes, but the logistics behind where we're at and critical services, and as we move further away from the dollar amount we should have, the more infrastructure deficit you build up over time. That's what happens, in my opinion. So from a motion standpoint, I think I'm going to make the motion that the city council directs staff to prepare an agenda for and a certified tax rate to be determined on or before June 22nd, and to notice the county for a truth in taxation hearing on August 8th.
Second.
It's been moved and anxiously seconded.
And,
Yeah.
and just a clarification, we'll request from the county August 8th, but if there's any conflicts, the county decides, and that's why I'm saying I'd rather get our desired slot in first. So,
Yeah, now regarding that night, do you want the time? We just realized that there is a Whitaker event at 8 o'clock at the cemetery, right? 8
Yes.
o'clock? It's a cemetery tour. So if you wanted to go 6 o'clock.
Which one will be scarier? The,
can't have it any sooner than 6 PM.
One
but you
could
have-
result in ending up in the other, so, you know.
Although, you know,
Traditionally, we have our meetings at 7. I'd feel better about setting the hearing at 7 rather than at 6. With respect, I don't want a conflict, but I worry if we set it at 6, are people going to say, oh, you're trying to change the time on us?
so you ask
Well,
those
I
that-
think we'll shoot to have open houses before that, but
Yeah,
also
we could
maybe
have
an
an open house starting
Yeah,
at 6 and the official
I would say
hearing
we
at 7.
shoot to have other days before that date, but why not also have an open house time, question answer, posters that explain.
Prior to 7 that
Prior
night?
to 7, yeah.
Okay.
So we have a motion on the table to tell the county, yes, we're doing a tax hike, we're going to give you a rate by the 22nd, and set our public hearing for the August 8th. Further discussion? Let's start the voting with Tammy.
Aye.
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 Okay, you have that direction. Is there any other direction you need from us?
Well, we need to decide when you're going to have a work session to discuss that and decide what
Next
that
week?
rate will be.
Well, can I say something? We do have a newsletter that's going out late June. If we want to get something in that, even something small, gotta have it by the end of next week.
And it shouldn't
By
be
the end,
something small.
not
it
this
should be
week,
something
but
big.
It should be something bigger than small.
yeah, well,
My intent,
Let's give it the front page.
yeah, my intent
Well-
was to talk about it in the mayor's message and try to make a case why this is being proposed on the front page.
And
I-
then some other information.
I would suggest that we take that opportunity to use some of those PR materials that really, and so I would say it's probably going to be either a newsletter solely focused on this issue or multiple pages added. And
Yeah.
I would vote solely focused on this issue unless there's, other really pressing.
so you're saying something separate from the regular.
I'm just saying, let's
Maybe a
make
sing-
this
a single
quarterly.
one-pager.
Single one page.
Let's reduce as much as we can the other sections that are normally in the newsletter. You can still have the calendar events on the back page, but let's.
Well, we have the
devote-
July
Yeah,
4th
the main
insert.
Yeah,
function
we
is
have
the
the
July
July-
4th information.
As it is right now, it's just a 4-page newsletter.
Does that
It's
include the
small.
July 4th information?
No, and then there's the insert that's
A
separate.
July
So is
4th
this is the
insert.
glossy, but you're talking.
This is the glossy
But we've
one,
got
full
two
color.
opportunities, because we've got does the
Right.
glossy go with the utility bill?
No,
No.
it's
No, it's
mailed.
all postal
Your newsletter, your colored glossy newsletter, it goes to all postal customers, which is a wider distribution than your utility bill insert, which only goes to utility customers. So people in apartments and what all don't get the utility bill, but they will all get the newsletter.
So my suggestion is, I'll put something in the front page in the mayor's message, but that we also craft another insert that's maybe a one-pager front and back that would have additional information.
What I'm hearing from Tammy, and maybe I'm going to state it a little differently, is, look, this is the first time we've done this in how many years?
Let's do it right.
Let's do it right and make sure the communication is upfront and it's not pulling a fast one on the
Yeah.
community.
Well, and that would give us more, are you suggesting a separate mailing then?
No, because the earlier we get the information to people, the more time they have to process it and ask further questions and calendar the events that we're proposing, open houses, et cetera. So I don't think
Okay, so I just want to question Jake, though, if it's the end of next week, does that allow the publishing, printing time in advance
That
of
would
the
give
July
us about
4th?
a week to do the final formatting, and then, yeah. the
But
printing.
when does it go out then in relation to July
It'll
4th?
be-
Because it'll have July 4th
Yeah,
information
it'd
in
be
it.
about the 26th, 27th of June,
It's pretty late, but.
yeah.
Is that acceptable if it's that late? The
If this-
July 4th information going out that late?
When would we normally send it out? It would seem like
That's about what we
26.
normally do, about a week before.
Yeah.
Before.
This is adding additional work to that newsletter, so it's probably going to go out later than it would go out if we weren't adding this to the newsletter, but that's why I'm questioning Jake. Can we get it out? Can we get all of this done by the end of next week?
And the 4th of July is on a separate piece of paper anyway. It's not part of
Right.
the
usually an
newsletter.
insert
Right.
of the insert.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's helpful at all, I'd be willing to be like on a subcommittee to kind of help formulate.
I'm glad
and
you
then-
brought that
That
up.
might
And
be
then we
something
could
we need.
present that.
I like that. A couple of you, if you want to
Yeah,
work
and
with
we could
staff.
And then we could communicate via email as a council to get thoughts and approval and.
A couple of you want to work
Does
with
anyone-
staff? or-
Anyone who wants to
My expertise is visual.
At least, well, there's Tammy. I guess
join
if anybody
Tammy on
else
the
wants to.
visuals?
Okay.
What'd you say?
Is there anyone else who wants to join Tammy on working on visuals?
Yeah, visuals, that's fine.
Otherwise, we'll just circulate them back to you and let you react to them.
Yeah, I
But we saw some good stuff from the county,
Yeah.
explaining how the certified tax rate bill, didn't you think that was pretty good stuff?
Yes, it is.
I mean, we can take some of that and use that, but we can also then refer them, we can put the full slideshow on the website, modify it to fit Centerville, refer them to that slideshow, but do a condensed version somehow in the newsletter. But you need to message, I assume you're going to message what you're going to spend it for, what you want to spend it for. When are you going to discuss that?
Well, we can discuss it tonight after we finish the rest of our agenda, or you could discuss it next Tuesday. What would you like
Next
to do?
Tuesday is the second Tuesday, and there will be story time that I really wanted to hear.
At 7?
Shenanigans?
Should
At
we do a
7?
dinner
Shenanigans.
time?
Does that go for an hour,
It
basically?
usually goes for about an hour.
What if you
yes.
had 8 o'clock? You could do 8 next Tuesday. If you wait to
If we
the
wait till later, it's
20th,
gonna be bad.
yeah, no, we can't
No,
wait.
Jake needs it
Right.
before
Yeah, I
then,
need-
so.
Right,
Sooner than later.
we need direction, I'd say, by a week from tonight on what we're going to say that is to be used for.
Streets, sidewalks, police
Police.
improvements.
Please.
That's what I had previously
Yeah.
story. I'd love to add parks to it, but I'm not sure you're ready to do that.
I think the other thing that we need to
And
acknowledge
in-
is that we're replacing cash reserves
It-
because of Utopia.
Increase our rainy day fund. I would
We-
say build on the general fund reserves or increase rainy day.
Well, then we also mentioned in the newsletter, the budget newsletter, we've been deferring some equipment replacement.
That's right.
Now it's not going to be as jazzy sounding as some of the other stuff you've mentioned, but that is part of it too. We've really cut that down this year in the budget.
I didn't, you said replacing cash reserves?
Building emergency reserve or?
Improving general fund reserves is the
Okay.
language I meant to say. I want to call it a rainy day fund, but we don't have a rainy day fund, we have a general fund. So how do you say, what's
You could
what's the best wording? Is it improve our general fund reserve, or do you call it a rainy day fund?
I think increasing the general fund sounds better than the rainy day, like we're raising your taxes just so we have a fun fund.
Nothing's fun.
That's not
Nothing's
fun.
fun about this.
In that, excuse me, in that regard, Robin and I had a discussion talking about it a couple of weeks ago, and I had a call from a resident responding to the budget newsletter today, talking about overall taxes in Centerville. The resident today, who is a former councilman and friend, Paul's chuckling, but it's not who you think, Paul.
Okay.
No. Complained that Centerville has probably the highest tax rate in the county. And we believe that is not the case. Robin and my conversation is that it would be nice to have something that compiled all of the elements of tax rate. In other words, we've got our city tax, we've got South Davis Metro, we've got South Davis sewer, all of those components, and to have a comparison that says, taking all the components that affect Centerville directly, what are those components for Farmington, what are those components for Bountiful, what are those components for Wood Cross? Because I believe that the person who talked to me, and I told him so, is not right, but if that's what people believe, it is a problem that we
Get the
need to change.
information out.
So I guess I'm asking you,
So-
Steve,
so-
to correct Jake, to put together something that
That
summarizes all.
that summarizes the taxation for municipal services. For
Because I have
example,
talked to Steve about it, and we talked about having apples to apples so that, I mean, Farmington isn't paying the fire district, so even though their tax rate looks higher than ours, might not be when you add everything in.
And do you want to do that with the existing rate or the proposed rates?
Well, I'd like to do it with the existing, so that we know where we're at.
'Cause our existing rate is like, $2.
it's negligible.
Oh, no,
on the fire.
the new
Fire.
fire district,
New fire
the new
district.
fire district rate,
So, yeah, and then you have the recreation district.
Yeah.
right.
But all the other cities in Davis County are part of a sewer district, and so they have a property tax rate that's probably higher than ours, so that would go the other direction.
Just the various components.
That make
I don't
up
have
the
a handle on it.
the municipal package, the tax
Do you
rates.
want it on a tax rate, or do you want it, is it easier to visualize on a, on
Per
on a
average
on a
home.
$300,000 home?
That's probably simplest to say,
Yeah.
if you lived in Farmington, your $300,000 home would have this
For
Yeah.
dollar
municipal
amount of
services.
taxes.
That's probably, whatever makes the most sense, and that's probably the most
That's
sensible.
probably the easiest
I
to
think it's
digest.
a lot easier for people because they start counting the zeros in front of the tax rate and it doesn't.
The other thing is it
And
ought
we
to be
need
consistent
a
with
graph.
the other information that we're providing from the county, and that is based on dollar value of a home, and so
Right.
that makes the most sense, and then it's gonna be consistent throughout rather than switching measurements.
Yeah, and we got that value from the county today. It's
Mm-hmm.
299,000.
299,000.
We used 300,000 in the
Is
newsletter.
the average, yeah, it's the average home today.
Yeah. That's what I think we have to use that in the
Yeah, that's our number.
truth in taxation advertisement. So, we can use if you're okay, we'll
Let's
just use
just round up.
300,000.
Yeah. I don't really care if it's 299 or 300, it's gonna send the same message.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, maybe in that summary, but I think we are required to use the 299.
In the official,
our notice.
Right,
In
so
the
let's
official
be
notice.
consistent with
Yeah,
the notice.
true. That's right. Okay,
Lots
so.
of work to do.
We're meeting next Tuesday night?
Did we set a time?
Oh, did we?
We said 8.
Oh, no, wait a minute,
but
or are we meeting next Tuesday night?
Yes.
You had mentioned 8 as
We
a
need to.
possibility, but
What would
I
you-
have
what would
Parks
you-
and Rec at 7, so I could do 8, or I could do dinner time before that, so.
That's the 13th.
If you do before, you got to be through by 7, presumably. If you can do 8, you can go for a couple hours. You can go to 4 or 5
I like
hours if
the
you'd
idea of
like.
having a deadline, like Stephanie and I have to be somewhere.
Yeah, we keep blowing these.
But
Yeah, have we
realistically,
conformed to a deadline ever?
So-
Let's go with, I'd suggest we go with 8 PM.
Okay.
And if you're ready to suggest something now with the idea you could change it, you could say, let's start preparing the idea with a 25% number and then sort of change it, or you could choose a different number, 35%,
Well,
whatever your.
I would feel more comfortable having that not just pulled out of a hat, but based on it. There's a couple different ideas I've had. Either really trying to kind of calculate a rough estimate of what some of the real needs are, and what the ideal increase would be to match those needs, but then at least we go from there and cut down.
Have
maybe.
you looked at Randy's budgets before?
Right, right. Or, and I mentioned this to Steve today, I'd like to do the math on finding out the last time we did raise property taxes and what that tax rate was set at, and calculate what the percentage of raising the tax rate would be to just get back to where we were over 20 years ago. And I think that's an interesting starting point for the discussion. I think it helps frame the fact that, in 1990, you were okay with paying this tax rate. It didn't wreck your life, you got used to that level of service, and we're just trying to continue that for you.
Well, your increase is about 200% back to 1994.
Right.
And I don't think any way that
Well,
that's
no,
gonna fly.
but that's a good number to start the discussion, and, that combined with what the needs are, and then say, here's realistically why we know we need to do this, what do we feel like we can do realistically to our citizens' budgets, right? So.
One of the pieces of information you've asked for, which we can give you either tonight or next Tuesday night, is our best attempt to get the estimates for the gasoline tax, the Class C tax. So Jake's had follow-up conversations, but he can just hold that and present that Tuesday night if you'd like. Or he can share it with you tonight. It's up to you. Why don't we just hold that to Tuesday and we'll have that discussion then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think, Tammy, some of those points are great for when we do open house, to give people points of reference. I mean, some of the things we can't squeeze into a newsletter, or what their streets and water replacement looks like over the 100-year, 150-year horizon, and show people that that's not really necessarily a practical way to look at it. I mean, it is what it is, but it's not a practical way to manage the maintenance of the city. No offense, Randy, at all intended. But it should be on a more frequent replacement plan than that. But that's more of a open house rather than a newsletter. So I would say as many factoids as are helpful.
Yeah.
Put them out there.
Okay, so you want to go on to the RDA at this time?
Unless, if you don't want to pick a number or direct staff further on the analysis.
Well, what we'll, I think what I hear is we need to come as staff to give you our best.
I thought you looked at a number, instead of doing a 200-year replacement, that would be something that came up with the estimates for the 150-year replacement.
100 or 150.
Something like that we could, and you
Yeah.
can tweak some of those assumptions, because some of them might have been a little bit conservative, but something that would justify that, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah.
And twist Kevin's arm a little bit, and tell him to come up with some better.
Unfortunately, even at 50%, it doesn't cover roads, police. It doesn't. It
Right.
does not cover even
close
a
to
portion
roads.
of what we
Yeah.
would need to cover with it. So.
Yeah, so you'll be doing some allocation.
So I think it'd be more allocation that would be necessarily being coy about the percentage. And frankly, I would be remiss in saying if it's less than 50%, it's going to do little to nothing in terms of
fixing it.
of even offsetting some of these expenses with the drop in revenue year over year.
Yeah.
You're right, I just found that sheet, and it would take $500,000 to go from the 200 years to the 150 years.
That's giving everything to roads and
Everything to
nothing to
roads
police.
and
So
nothing to police.
that's why I'm saying 50%. It doesn't stem the tide, it just slows it down. That becomes a problem for future councils potentially, hopefully not 20 years in the future, but.
Okay, so with that discussion, I guess I'll ask to adjourn to an RDA meeting where we will. So we have a motion to adjourn to an RDA meeting.
Second.
So moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
We can put up the budget.
That passes unanimously. We are now in the RDA meeting. Let's find our RDA.
You have some minutes.
We had a short set of RDA minutes. See if I had any changes to those.
No, is that what's attached to the RDA, the whole thing?
I had no changes. Anybody else have any suggested modifications to the minutes? If not, I will make the motion that we adopt the May 16th RDA minutes as written.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. Budget staff report. How about Bill?
So the
Bill
budget
can have that
was
one.
in the total budget? Are you sure? You in a work session?
So you got to go back.
Well, I think if you.
I think it's a separate meeting. You got to go back out to the Novus agenda.
No, the budget work session? No.
Yeah, it's an RDA.
It's in the RDA.
Oh, yeah, the separate RDA entry, yeah, that's right.
While he's finding that, they did add a new feature, you know, I know a lot of you don't use the board view, but they did add a new feature on the board view where you can just see the meetings in a drop-down menu, and so you can toggle back
Upper
and forth
left.
between the meetings a little faster
Oh, really?
than having to go out.
Marcia forwarded
right up on the
a
left-hand
brief tutorial to you on that.
Are they going to allow us to mark up things yet, or do we still have to pull it into something else?
They
to
just
mark
have that
up?
little notes page.
Okay, so let me speak to the RDA budget briefly. Oh, I'm sorry.
The recorder just quit.
Don't tell me you just quit.
I didn't do it.
You said the recorder just quit. I'm like, really?
2 weeks, you have to give us at least 2 weeks.
There's an error, undefined external error. The program has stopped creating data.
Have you got the portable in there?
Help, George. That's probably okay. If it's a WAV file or an MP3, they can truncate and you can still recover them, so. As long as you have the current file, you're
yes.
good.
Start a new one.
As long as you're really recording the meeting.
Thank you, YouTube.
Well, it said up to this point that it was recording. I checked it. So just so you know, I'm going to stop and shut down and restart the computer again like I did
Okay.
at the start.
Can we take a
Let's
5
take a
minute
5-minute
break?
break.
5-minute break.
Take a break.
We'll let you.